Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar on taking care of your workforce, part of a joint series with the National League of Cities and the American Psychological Association. Today's webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be sent to all registrants. Please feel free to ask questions during today's presentation using the questions box of your dashboard on the right of your screen. Now I would like to introduce today's panelists. Dr. Amanda Shew is a board-certified psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner and serves as a city council member for the city of Jordan, Minnesota. Dr. Shew has experience practicing in integrated behavioral health settings and providing mental health care to diverse clients across the lifespan. She maintains research interests focused on resilience and trauma and has been collaborating with the League of Minnesota Cities to reduce the impact of trauma on public safety personnel. Dr. Judith Blanton is an organizational psychologist who has spent more than 25 years helping organizations become more effective, efficient, and vital. She uses her psychological training, research knowledge, business experience, and sense of humor to support and challenge leaders to stretch their thinking and enhance their own and their team's performance. Her clients within the US and internationally have included Fortune 100 companies, startups, and nonprofit organizations. She worked with government agencies at the state and national level, as well as local law enforcement groups. She lives in Pasadena, California, and has a particular interest in the use of data to inform and support organizational change. Taryn Austin is the Director of Clinical Operations for Invest EAP. Taryn's experience includes having been a supervisor and the clinical director of the mobile crisis team for the Howard Center for Human Services in Chittenden County, Vermont. Most recently, she worked with the acutely mentally ill as director for the Middlesex Therapeutic Community Residents for the state of Vermont's Department of Mental Health. Taryn is dually licensed in mental health and substance abuse treatment. She has served individuals and groups of different ages with various psychiatric, emotional, behavioral, and life changes, specializing in risk assessment, loss, and life transitions. Taryn has been a management consultant to numerous agencies and community leaders over the years within Vermont, New Hampshire, and New York. She also has a private therapeutic practice dealing with anxiety, depression, and other life and work stressors. A huge thank you and welcome to our panelists. And now I'd like to turn the discussion over to Dr. Amanda Shew. Amanda, it's all yours.
Thank you. So I just wanted to briefly mention that I do serve my community as city council member for the city of Jordan, Minnesota. We are located south of the Twin Cities metro area of Minneapolis and St. Paul, and we have a population of about 6,500 people. And in these varied roles, I understand that there's vast needs of mental health care for, of course, individuals and communities. And mental health stigma is alive and well in our country. And recent events have really started to shine a light on the importance of addressing mental health needs. And with webinars such as this, where we can specifically name mental health and the impact that it has at work, is going to help to reduce barriers to seeking treatment and support. So with COVID-19 and ongoing racial pandemic that we're all facing, we're being forced to change how do we address common problems. So for city staff and elected officials, we're needing to adjust just not how we do business as usual. We have to be able to understand that we're not immune to the physical and emotional risks that we take just by simply going to work. And as you focus on how best that you can support your employees during the time of COVID, I want to specifically address the need to identify and start to actually take action on the racial pandemic and not just consider this as an afterthought. As we've seen with other health inequities, those who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color are specifically being hit hard by this pandemic due to issues such as racism, access to poor health care, and poor housing. And this is another example of why this issue of racism really requires our ongoing attention. And it's another area of support that many of our staff and employees will be seeking out to you as a city leader. And managers play a key role in supporting mental health and the well-being of their employees. So as we talk more today, we need to remember that city staff are frontline personnel too. So they're essential staff. So we have law enforcement, fire department, EMTs, public works. They have all needed to continue working despite the pandemic and the drastic changes that other businesses or other communities have needed to take. So this requires us to adapt to ever-changing needs of our employees and of course the communities they serve. So for many, this is an opportunity to make necessary and meaningful changes in our cities and with our staff. For others, this is an incredibly stressful time, and we need to remember that we're not alone in these experiences and we're not alone in trying to find solutions. As city leaders, we need to continue to support our employees, but that might look different than what we're accustomed to. So during this session, we'll talk more about how we can adequately identify and intervene for our staff, and then we'll provide specific resources that could be used as needed. So in my role as city council member, I've had the opportunity to work with my city administrator and other department heads to understand what do they need to adequately perform their roles and their duties. So that includes having a comprehensive plan. We are allowing our leaders and employees to be empowered about how they can make decisions about the work that they do and how they do that differently, and how we can continue to adapt and make decisions that are safe and appropriate for our staff and ultimately our city as a whole. So as you can imagine, those that we serve are displacing a lot of their frustrations on you, on your staff, and this takes a significant amount of energy and time to really practice empathy and avoid having those somewhat negative interactions affect your own personal lives. So you might have heard this before, but there's no going back to normal really anytime soon. And that requires ongoing flexibility, the ability to tolerate ambiguity, and also continue to be a leader in your city and for your employees. So these other techniques that we'll talk about in detail are important for resilience. So that's the ability to bounce back after challenges and adversity and hopefully become stronger after that. So we need to pace ourselves and know that there is much work to be done, but it's a marathon and not a sprint. And I hope that we can learn what we can do now, as well as what you can continue to work towards. So we'll bring up the community stress related to COVID, the ongoing exposure of systemic racism, and how we can be intentional in our actions and decisions. So I'd like to briefly introduce Dr. Judith Blanton. So she'll start reviewing some of these stressors, as well as what are some specific things that we could do in our everyday work for our employees.
Okay, well, hello and welcome. So let's start with the basics. You are under stress, and your employees are under stress, and the people that they serve are under stress. So our time is limited today. So I'm going to start with just some examples of some of the behaviors that come out when you are stressed, and see if any of these seem familiar. Depression or anxiety, anger, irritability, restlessness, feeling overwhelmed, unmotivated, unfocused, trouble sleeping or sleeping too much, racing thoughts or constant worry, problems with your memory or concentration, and making bad decisions. And we're not even going to talk today about the physiological or medical impact of long-term stress. So it's probably not part of your written job description, but clearly a major part of your current job is helping your workforce deal with their stress. And you need to help them deal with the stress of those they serve. And of course, this is on top of your day job. Our time is limited today, so I'm going to talk about 4 things that you can do. But I want to emphasize that you need to do these 4 things after and while you are managing your own stress. So the first NLC webinar dealt with managing your own stress, and if you missed it, you can get it. It's recorded, and I would really urge you to do so. But the major message is the same as in the airlines: put your mask on first. You need to be in good shape in order to take on your challenging role. And you need to take care of yourself in order to be a role model for your team. So my first suggestion is focus and prioritize. Why are we here? What is our purpose? So one of the best things to do when you're seasick is to keep your eye on the horizon. And we're in turbulent times. So keeping our eye on our purpose and our goal can help us deal with things and keep us from sloshing around with our unsettled emotions. So getting back to basic helps your employees stay centered in a time when stress makes us unfocused. Helping them prioritize helps workers really use their resources more effectively. And it's also a way to motivate employees when they feel overwhelmed and unmotivated. Most people in public service get pleasure and meaning out of helping the people that they serve. So when we remind each other about why we're here and how we can help, that's energizing. There's research that says that helping others can actually reduce depression. So keep your employees' eyes on that horizon. My second point is to demonstrate empathy. Well, that should probably be the first point, because dealing with the human tragedy is always our first priority. And doing this requires leaders to acknowledge the professional and the personal challenges that the employees, clients, and their loved ones are experiencing during this crisis. And this can't be delegated to HR. So be kind. Everybody's a little tender right now. Demonstrate by your actions as well as your words that you understand the stress and pressure that your employees are under. If possible, provide them with some training to deal with the difficult, stressed out customers. De-escalation training could probably be helpful for all of us today. And then the third point that I want to deal with is to listen, reflect, and then act. This is good practice for you, but it's also something that you can help your employees do better. So one of the symptoms of stress is making bad decisions. Now I know there's always a need to move rapidly in these times, but stress can cause us to do this too quickly, too emotionally, and too reactively, reflexively, rather than thoughtfully. So this is the time to encourage your employees to listen deeply, and to listen to diverse voices. And when you're listening to your employees, listen to the question beneath the question. For example, if they're asking about the budgets, the question underneath that question may be, could I get laid off? So when you are asked a question, spend a little time and think, is there a question underneath that question? Is the question a request for data, or is it for reassurance? And this isn't a time to be defensive, to justify, to go into detailed explanations. Sometimes you just need to listen. And then it is important to pause, to breathe, and then to act. My fourth point has to do with communication. Under stress, there's research that shows we have problems with memory and concentration. We lack focus. We're not hearing very well. It's probably impossible today to over-communicate. Saying it once is not sufficient. In order to communicate effectively, I would say stop first and think about the goal of your communication to your employees. So why is this information important? What do you want your employees to learn from it? And what actions do you want them to make on the basis of it? So you're not just spewing a bunch of facts and data. And when you begin to communicate, you also need to think about your audience. Who is your audience? And you've got to really frame your discussions in terms of your specific audience and your specific message. As I said, when we're under stress, we aren't able to hear and process information very well. So it's useful to explore and to use various modes of communication, not just Zoom. Use phone calls, meetings, webinars, memos, text. Just sending one email is not enough. And repetition helps. So research suggests that good communication needs to reduce cognitive effort. So what this means is make it simple, make it clear, make it brief. Don't force your audience to figure out what you have said and how to interpret what you have said. Don't make them figure out the implications, spell it out. And if there's bad news, give it straight. In these times, it's particularly important to be transparent. Don't sugarcoat the bad news, but put that bad news in perspective. Let them know what we are going to do to address this setback and how we can succeed together. We also have data that if leaders display excessive optimism or overconfidence in the face of obviously difficult conditions, they lose credibility. So be optimistic, but practice what we call bounded optimism. That is optimism, but realistic optimism. Project a sense of confidence and hope and combine that with your realism. And with all of your communications, be clear about what you know and also what you don't know and what you're going to do to learn more. So I hope we can talk a bit more about these issues when we get to our question and conversation period. So Amanda?
Excellent, thank you. So now I'd like to transition then to Taryn Austin and have some additional information about what can we do to really support our workforce.
Right. Hi, and once again, welcome everybody. So I'm listening to Sarah and Judith, and I think we're also touching on some points that we feel strongly about, one of which is resiliency, which I'll get to a little later. I wanted to talk about that right now. We're all struggling in the community in different ways. We are responding to the COVID pandemic. We're responding to the racial pandemic. We're responding to protests and uprisings and rising unemployment. And that's tough, and we know that this is a tough time with a lot of different opinions of how this is going to play out. But one thing we do share in common is a sense of uncertainty right now, the sadness, the anger, and then people are afraid. People are really afraid. And so one of the things I wanted to share was that this could be related to our survival instincts and our survival mechanisms, which, as we know, are fight, freeze, and flee. And so people really did the freeze beautifully in the beginning. They sat at home, they hunkered down, they listened to directions, they really followed what was being told. There was nowhere to flee. So flee really wasn't an option for most people. And now we're sitting with the fight. So I want to put that in perspective to understand that this was expected, and that anxiety is at an all-time high right now. People have a lot of time on their hands, anxiety levels are high, and there's a lot going on. And what we know is that people, when we feel overwhelmed, we can often feel powerless and out of control. I'll speak a little bit more to that later. The second thing that I think we need to address is that we are experiencing loss. There's an incredible sense of loss of the world as we know it, loss of a future we probably imagined, loss of jobs, maybe loss of independence, etc. And if we look at the grief cycle, we won't go into great detail, but just there are 5 stages. I do want to point out they're not linear. and people can fluctuate from one to the other in a matter of hours. Sometimes it takes weeks, sometimes months, and sometimes not everyone goes to all the stages. But for right now, they are denial. It's not that bad. I'm young. I'm not going to get it. To the anger, this isn't worth me losing my job. Or you get angry at other people, right, for not wearing a mask, and you try to protect them, and yet they don't seem to be protecting you. And then the bargaining, I'll just go to one gathering, large gathering, and then I'll go home and I won't do it again. And then the sadness, I don't know when this is going to end. I can't imagine a future for my children, etc. And the last one where the power really lies is in the acceptance. And that's really, we're in this, what do I need to do to get through this in a way that's healthy? So that's the stages, and you might well see that showing up in your staff, the sort of defiance from that fight response, right? The fight response, and then that sort of sadness, anger from that loss grief cycle. So just to be aware of that. So as managers, one of the things you can do is to really normalize the experience. And I'm not saying people are doing this, but we don't want to be avoiding it. We don't want to be dismissing people's feelings, and we definitely don't want to tell them to get over it. So what we want to do initially is to really understand that as a leader, we bring ourselves to every interaction we have. And so it's important that you understand your own emotions and your own triggers, so that not only can you recognize it in your staff, but you can also bring some knowing and commonality to your interactions. One of the things I wanted to say is, as stressful as this is for everybody, and I did hear, I think Judith and Sarah at some point mentioned the little resilient piece, and then also briefly about you're not doing this alone. Every CEO and leader and community and race and gender are looking for a solution together. We're all in this together. And so that's sort of powerful, knowing that we're not alone navigating this. And what we do know about resilient people is that resilient people know how to put things in context. And as a leader, you can really support your staff in doing just that. The second thing we know about resiliency is that people who are resilient, which, by the way, part of it is actually a learned behavior. I always used to think that resiliency, we're just born with it, but there is definitely a learning component to it. And what people who are resilient do is they make changes before they're forced to change. So knowing what you know, I understand a lot of your staff are out in the field already, and they don't have the privilege of being in their homes during their work days. But for those who are at home, who are going to be coming back into the office space, whatever that looks like, they do have time on their hands right now for you to start asking those questions, right? The questions, and I'll talk a little bit more, and then we'll go to those questions. But I think when you have an overwhelmed system, we don't want to overwhelm it more. And as managers, I often say you need to check your own emotional temperature before you show up for any interaction, because as I said, you bring yourself to the interaction. And what we want to really understand is when people are feeling overwhelmed, they feel powerless and they feel out of control. And so one of the things you could do is, when someone is feeling powerless, the goal is to make them feel more powerful. And two easy ways for that to happen are offer them choices, and the second thing is allow them a voice. And you can contain the format and what that would look like. The other thing, and I talk about it, and I know we're going to have a question and answer later, is I do mention having mini breaks for your brain, and we can go into detail about that if people are interested later. But your brain is going constantly with threat. It doesn't know that the threat has ended, because every time it sees a face mask, or you go to the supermarket, or you put on the news, there it is. And so it's pumping adrenaline through your body, right, waiting for that threat. And you might find that yourself and your staff are exhausted by the end of the day, more than when they actually commuted or when they had a full going to the office day. So be aware of that piece too. And so that idea of a mini break for your body is extremely valuable, to just tell your brain, it's okay, we got it for this moment. We're going to give it a little breather right now. So I can share more tips on that later. And then transition rituals. This is really valuable. If you are at home, working from home, really valuable to actually not only switch off your computer, but and encourage your staff to do the same. Switch it off, shut it down, close the lid, pull it out from the wall if need be, close your door. You might want to set an alarm, as we did at school, right? Alarm told you when your breaks were and when the end of the day was. I'm going to encourage you not to look at your cell phone, because the minute you look at the time on your cell phone or you set an alarm, you go, oops, oh, there's another message, and you'll go off in a different direction. So a cell phone, I would not encourage you to have that be your clock, but not a bad thing to have one that's visual. The other thing I would recommend is, if you have children at home, if your staff have children at home, it might be an idea to put an open close sign on the door. So when you close the door and it's closed for the day, your children know that you're available, or your spouse knows that you're available to them. And if it's open, they realize that you're actually working. The other thing is, and we'll talk later about keeping staff informed about what's going on in the world and what you're doing. It's also very valuable, if you're not doing anything, to let them know that too. So let them know, right now we've got some ideas on the table, some suggestions, some thoughts, but just so you know, we haven't forgotten it, we're working on it, but we haven't come up with anything at this point. That's all they want to know, is that you haven't forgotten them and that you are thinking about them in next steps. And then obviously we want to, once again, not overload an overloaded system. So you want to be, if you understand your team, is to prioritize resources. We've been hit in every direction by so much well-meaning advice, so many resources, so many websites, so much information coming at us, that it can overload, already an anxious team. So once again, make sure that if you know your team, pull out the odd article you think would be really interesting for them, and maybe you could do some follow-up and some follow-through with that. So you have a theme, you follow through. And then we want to make sure we keep routines and structures as close as we can to norm, and that we also have our policies and procedures as up to date as possible, and that staff know that. And then to the questions, ask the questions. There's a lot of questions you could be asking your workforce, and right now people are feeling pretty disconnected. And so some of the questions you can ask is, how is this impacting your work? Number one, how is this affecting you as a leader? Because you're leading differently now. You don't have your team at the ready like you had in the past. We've all gone onto different formats, be it Zoom, be it My Meeting, be it Doxy.me. People are, have done a really wonderful job of shifting and changing. And I think that's really powerful, to know how quickly we've changed and adapted. And that's the strength we have as humans. So I think it's important for your staff to know that you see that in them. You see that adaptability, you see that flexibility, you see how quickly they've moved into a different direction to support and nurture their work and the people they serve. The questions I would ask are, what do you need to succeed going back? There's a lot of anxiety about what would going back look like. Ask that question. Speak to other companies, speak to other municipalities, speak to other departments. What are they doing? What are they thinking? And then peer groups, incredible value around a peer group right now. People who know each other, people who work well together, who understand each other's work, great use of the time, and they can do it online. So that's a wonderful platform we have. Be flexible if you can. Obviously, some people have young children, some people have elderly parents living with them. If there is some flexibility, look and see what that would look like. And then, what is your community looking for? If you are not on the same page as what the problem is, you're not going to solve it. So really important, ask that question. Ask your community, what are you wanting? What are you seeing? What are you experiencing? What do you imagine we can do for you? And that the part of that is also having a working board. I am a great believer that when we look at balance and power and control and everything that's going on in our worlds and our community right now, the balance is so tipped right now. And the idea is to bring it back to some kind of normalcy. And that would be that control piece, that power, make people who are powerless feel more powerful. The other piece of that is, there's some amazing things going on in the world right now. Just incredible things people are doing. And so to encourage staff to come up and say, what is working, right? Have a what's working board, rather than what's not working. And it's amazing the feedback you'll get. People are really hungry right now to have something other. So that's just an idea. And then, how to make, how do you get comfortable with the uncomfortable? I think it's the most important thing is to realize it's not necessarily your job to fix it, but if you can make it more bearable or more manageable for your staff, that'll go a long way, a long way. So I am from an employee assistance program. We're a national employee assistance program. I'm aware that not everyone has one listening in today. I do know that we are one, but also that if you have an insurance broker, that they usually can guide you with that. And we can talk, as I said, if people have questions later about what we offer. Basically, an EAP, which is an employee assistance program, we, for managers, we're your thinking partner. You know, you can phone into the management line and we will guide you with things like, how do you have a difficult conversation with someone? How do you think about layoffs and what would that look like? How do you update your policies and procedures in a way that makes sense for everybody, etc., etc. Sometimes it's just managers overwhelmed and saying, I don't even know which way to turn. I don't feel I'm leading well or managing well. And we can help with that. And then we offer, as I said, it's a free and confidential, I haven't said, but it's a free and confidential service for anybody in your company, but also in your municipality, but also for anyone living under your roof, be that be a roommate, be that be a boyfriend or a girlfriend, be that an elderly parent, and any family member. So it is a service offered to all that your municipality in certain regions pays for. We are known for counseling. We do a 5-session model, which I can get into if people are interested later. We will help people to get childcare. And when I say get childcare, we will help them really navigate what are the licensed facilities in your area, what questions to ask when you're looking for a daycare, etc. And that same would go for elder care. We can help guide you with that as well. And then we have a partner that will do legal and financial support, and you get a half an hour free legal and a half an hour free financial consultation, and then they give you some extra perks. For example, if you're doing tax, they would give you some break on tax, the amount to do your taxes for you. And we are exceptionally good at resources, at really helping people to not only to connect to resources, but to guide them in the right direction and to really flush out with them what they're looking for. So that is an EAP, Employee Assistance Program. And I don't know, Sarah, if this is a good time, whether you want me to go through what we have actually done as an EAP, how we've supported our community, or whether you want to hold that for questions.
Thank you, Taryn. So I do have a question for you right away about the EAP. And this serves, of course, like you just briefly alluded to, as a great resource for many local governments, both managers and employees. What common areas are you seeing for employees or managers that are calling about recently since COVID and over the last few months?
Right. So initially, I think we got a lot of calls, people really worried about their teams separating out and not sure how to lead. How do I lead a team that are all separated? How do I lead a team that don't necessarily all have connection, right? Not everyone could get into Zoom. There might have been one computer in the home and the young children were doing schoolwork off that. So what would that look like? There was also a lot of questions on uncertainty of, is my job going to be, are they going to keep my job? How long is this going to go on for, right? How do I support my staff from a distance? What does managing look like? And one of the things that was really interesting is that managers were checking in too much and they were overloading. They were just overloading the staff. And it was done from a really kind place and also a fear base of, I don't want to lose my position as the leader, but also from their own sense of anxiety. And so hence I said earlier is to take that emotional step. Check your own emotional temperature and really, what is the intention here? Is it for me to feel better that I've reached out to my team, or is it really that I'm trying to support them? And I would ask the staff, what are you wanting? Is this too much? Is this too little? Is this the right format? Because they will tell you, they will tell you. So I think we saw a lot of that. There was a lot of, I think for staff, feeling that if they didn't work 24/7 and look like they were working 24/7, they might not look like they were valuable employees. And so they were starting to be exhausted. They were starting to feel burnt out. They were starting to have that compassion fatigue. and no one was giving them permission to do that self-care piece. Because I think a lot of people thought, well, of course people will take care of themselves, they're grown-up people. But when we're anxious and when we're emotional, we're not necessarily rational. And so that's what was going on. It was really showing up for leaders and saying, you need to model the behavior you want to see in your staff. You need to give them permission to take those mini breaks. Take those mini breaks. So that's really what we were seeing and continue to see. And now a little bit more, unfortunately, the anger, we're seeing the irritation, we're seeing the I don't care anymore, I wish I would just get it, get COVID now and get over it. So that, or, and you hear this, right? Old people, I mean, they're just going to be a drag on the system. I mean, it's terrible. And we're seeing it show up. I could keep going with 15 different things that people are saying. And you'll see it in your staff. You'll see that sort of indifference, that denial, that irritation. There's a more angry outbursts. And then we're seeing definitely a rise in suicidal thinking, if not suicide. And that is, I think, when we look at people who feel powerless and overwhelmed, as you know, we can often feel anxious and depressed. And if that's left unattended, we can sometimes have that suicidal thinking. So we really want to make people feel like they have some control and some power back.
Thank you. And that leads me to, I think, another question back up to Judy. When we're thinking about anxiety or stress and other specific characteristics for supporting your employees as a manager, especially with certain examples that we just reviewed, what about the role of maybe empathy or any of those other certain characteristics that managers could exhibit when they're working with their employees who are stressed?
Well, I think that it is important, again, deeds, not just words. So are there specific things that you can do to make some modifications in policy? Are there little things that we can do to help them deal with personal issues? Because they're dealing with personal issues now in a way that they probably have not had to do before, maybe having all the people, even trying to do a Zoom meeting with children and relatives and so on in your family. So, what things can you do? And I think doing some training, doing some training on how to use Zoom more effectively, how to send emails. So you have the subject line, change the subject line. The first statement should be like, what you want. So, give them a little bit of information that can help them be more effective as they're doing these things. And I think we talked about earlier about ritual transitions. So they have office hours. So there may be only office hours that they are on their email for X hours. And I think everybody needs at least an hour, probably more, just where they're not interrupted. I mean, there's data that if you are derailed, it probably takes up to 20 minutes to get back. So to do productive work, you cannot do really thoughtful, productive work in 10-minute intervals. So, figure out a way for yourself and for your people to give them this, hunk of time where they can do these things. And I think listen. I mean, that's again, I think that's understand what their issues are. And I'm doing a Zoom meeting tomorrow with my team, and when I give them the agenda, so one of the things is to give them some structure. They need more structure in this time. But I told them we're going to start off the meeting with each of you is going to give us one way that you are taking care of yourself. And so we're just going to go around and just talk personally about what they're going to do to take care of themselves. And I'm going to do the same. So I think those kinds of things, so that you know that there are personal issues. This is also an issue if you've got, you're doing a Zoom meeting, you may have other people on the meeting that never speak up, that get lost, that don't show up, get lost. And be careful about those. Check on them. You may need to check personally, but you can also just stress that you need everybody's input. They may be shy. There may be cultural issues why they don't speak up. They may not have an opinion. One of the things I have done in the past occasionally is to appoint a devil's advocate in the meetings. So if I'm not clear, or if somebody else is not clear, or there's an issue, and so it saves them, because they don't have to say, "Oh, I didn't understand." They can say, "I'm concerned that somebody might not have understood," or their job is to really raise the questions, ask for clarification, or really push back. You know, if I say something that may come across wrong, is for them to push back and say, "Well, maybe you really need to say that a different way."
I think that's a good example of maybe another question about how are we translating the importance of self-care into for our employees and the departments that we work in. And I know you just briefly gave an example about with Zoom meetings, for example, having that check-in opportunity. And with us in the city of Jordan, we actually have had some of our city council meetings as well as other commission meetings, staff meetings through Zoom. And while that can be a challenge in some ways to get that going, it may also be an opportunity because of things like the chat function, where if there are larger groups and people are not as likely to speak up in person or in other types of meetings, that actually is a way that they may feel more welcome to participate in different ways and still be heard. So trying to use some of those changes in technology to our advantage. So again, continuing with that question for both you, Taryn and Judy, about how else are we able to translate the importance of self-care as leaders and for our staff and our employees?
So I'm happy to just jump in and say that, you know, a Zoom lunch, you know, as a leader to show I'm having lunch. I'm actually having lunch, even though I'm in this meeting. And really, as you just said, you have a Zoom lunch and talk about the amazing things that have come up from being home. And you will hear people say, I've had lunch with my husband. I haven't had that in 6 years. Our shifts have been so different. And we actually sat down and had lunch together. Or I'm spending more time with my children. Or I got to do a project around the house because I didn't have that long commute. And people are really, as I said, so eager to share what is working, because it's exhausting to hold the other, you know, to constantly hold it. And I think, you know, I mentioned there's mini breaks and I never really said anything about them, but one of the things when I talk about mini breaks is people will often say, I don't have time, I'm exhausted. And so when I mention that, it's really things you're doing anyway. The one thing would be, as we know, mindful eating. We all eat in a day. It's look at your food as if you've never seen it before. Really look at it, smell it, describe it to yourself, you know, and then feel it, feel the texture of it. Put it to your nose, smell it, try and use those senses, get them really involved. And then when you put it in your mouth, what does it bring up? Does it conjure memory? Can you feel your salivary glands going? And then before you just chew and swallow, take one bite and see what happens. What does it feel like, taste like? Does the texture change? If it's chocolate, it might melt. If it's crunchy, it might, you know, crack. And so it doesn't take long, but it gives your brain that little respite that says, whew, it's not as bad as I think. And another thing, I think of washing dishes. We all wash dishes at some point, and to feel the texture of that water, like watch if there's bubbles, is there a smell from the soap powder? You know, what does that coffee cup feel like? What does that plate feel like? What does the sponge feel like? So it's just, you don't need a lot, but it's just in the moment. If you can just try and focus in other than what's going on, that sort of stimulation overload, it's a great way to just recenter for short periods of time. So those are just two examples.
I think another piece is to maybe give them some tools, give them some resources, like maybe have a yoga class, get somebody to do an optional yoga class for them, or give them a list of things. There's Calm, and there are all these things that just take, you know, a few minutes to do, and then you can say, well, you know, I've just been doing some breathing exercises. Or, you know, we can start, okay, we're all going to take 3 deep breaths before we get going, you know, something, and modeling the behavior, so that if you're going to say, I'm keeping an hour, don't anybody call me between 1 and 2, because I'm going to work on something important, and each of you, and I will not call any of you between 1 and 2. And if you get an email from me, you can ignore it, between those hours, something like that. So I think it's just, be spontaneous, and share your own issues, what you're doing to take care of yourself, because I think modeling it is very important.
And your comment, well, both of your comments really brought up the other issue with our roles as managers or city leaders, that we often don't have a lot of that time to have more specific boundaries, which was already alluded to with both of you, with you are working from home and there are so many needs that continue to be brought up that really seem to need our attention in the moment or are time sensitive. So do you have any other advice about other ideas to try to set some appropriate boundaries, especially in this time of COVID, and a lot of these local pandemic emergencies? How are we able to adjust and adapt to that in a way that still meets the needs of our employees, but also really helps with some of these other techniques we're really trying to model and work on?
Judith, if it's okay if I jump in. So slightly different, but it's to the point, is where are you feeling it in your body? And you were saying if you're meeting, most people are going to say upper neck, shoulders, they get headaches, or lower back, right? And what I often share with people is that these muscles in between our shoulder blades are probably the weakest muscles in our body, because we're holding up our head, which is really heavy, and everything we do is forward, right? We eat with a knife and fork forward, we text forward, we type forward, we drive with our shoulders forward. So a simple technique is every time you stand up from the computer, do the reverse. Just open that up. And so, you talk about time and people say, I don't have time. But that's taking care of yourself, right? That's a tiny thing that's taking care of your body, and it's strengthening here. And it's saying, I'm giving myself that moment to go, it's at that breath. It's that breath thing. Because if you think everything forward, you're not getting that oxygen because everything's scrunched up. You have to open that up, and that will do that for you. So that's just a simple technique. And I like your idea, Judith, when you do a meeting, you say you start off with a quick breathing exercise, or check in with where you're feeling it. Do maybe that little stretch out and then get into the meeting. It doesn't take long, but it shows your interest in them and in their health and your staff's health. It shows that you're taking care of yourself, and it shows that you are actively doing it. You're actively doing it. So you're really modeling it. And as I said, if you say to people, why don't you all check in for an hour-long thing? Most people are just, I don't have the time. It's too much. It's too overwhelming. But these little are very doable. So.
Well, I think the issue of time is critical. That's why I started out with focus and priorities. We actually are adding on things on top of people who are probably already stressed. So one of the things that I think a leader needs to do is maybe to let some things go. Yeah. That we cannot do these things. This is just impossible. And make that decision and make it say it and allow your employees to set some limits on what they can do and keep pace, because if they are overstressed, they're not going to be doing good work anyway. So I think that prioritization and the focus is absolutely critical. And the other is to do good enough. Good enough. I mean, that's not bad. That's not, but you don't have to be perfect. So what's good enough that we can do this? And we may not be able to do it, tomorrow. It may be good enough to do it by Thursday. So, what we may have to, again, change our timelines, we may have to change our priorities, but I think admit that. And you also just have to keep from beating yourself up. So if you can just answer the question, did I make the decision that I thought was right with the information that I had on hand at the time? And did I do the best I could? I mean, that's all we can do. We can do the best we could. So don't beat yourself up if it doesn't meet the standards that you could do 6 months ago. You may have to do it maybe not as quite as in a perfectionistic way, and there may be things you have to let go.
I can't tell you how many platforms I've been on where there's been a dog on someone's lap or a child has come through the back door, you know, and people are very, I think right now we're all feeling pretty vulnerable, and people are very accepting of not perfect, right? People are just doing the best they can. And I think that honesty and transparency goes a long way actually for connection. So is to not be afraid of it. That I would say, not be afraid of. And at one point, I just want to share that we have actually, you know, offered for our hospital staff, more for our ICUs and critical care units. We've offered a drop-in with a gentleman who does Zen Buddhism, and he has done mindful meditation. But what's been so wonderful is we set up times throughout the week, and people can drop in if they feel that they have the time, or if they want to free up that time. And they're short, they're probably 15 minutes. And so you can come in the middle, you can come at the end. But what I really think is so valuable is, once again, the choice. They're not being mandated to do it. It's just for them, purely for them. One of the things I think is so valuable is, even if nobody ever showed up to them, the fact that you set it up for them and that you thought of them and that you recognize that they were stressed will probably go further than if they'd showed up for every session. So there's something about showing up for your staff and showing up for yourself in that way.
Absolutely. Thank you for both of those comments. And that also brings me, I think, to another comment or question about when we think of how we're trying to connect now with the use of social media, and how that in itself can be another source of stress or conflict, and how that relates to with our employees or with our communities. How do you feel that the role of social media has with stress and with we communicate differently with our employees, if at all?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's enormous data that it is stressful. I mean, but a lot of people have not used Zoom before. I have a colleague who got me, she's teaching a class at a community college. And so she was using me to practice putting you into boxes. You know, you can go into little groups and things like that. So I think just becoming more familiar, and I said, do some training, you know, just give them some advice or show them how to get information. YouTube has everything. If you just type things up at the top, you know, when you go into your browser, you know, how can I do this, that they will give you information and advice. But we know that concentration, focusing on the screen for a long time is a problem. So now sometimes you don't have to just Zoom. You can have a phone conversation, and sometimes that's actually less stressful than Zooming. So, you know, think about other ways of doing this. But you know, again, it's the 24/7 of these. And again, give your people permission not to turn off their email at 9 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whatever. You know, you can negotiate that, and then they don't have to turn it on again. But they have permission to do that. And I know we're conscientious, and, you know, we'll just sneak in one more thing, or I'll open it up at night and then say, oh goodness, I should deal with that. No, you know, just give them permission and support each other in rationing it. And the other point is other media. So, you know, really suggest to people that they're not, when they're not working, they're not constantly watching the, you know, the news or cable stations where, you know, there's constant upset, and, you know, over and over and over. When it bleeds, it leads, which is one of the things that people, you know, reporters talk about. But limit your consumption of a lot of the material to, you know, 1 or 2 places that you trust, and you know, just check it in the morning news or the 6 o'clock news or whatever you like to listen to for some kind of summary to get that, and then you know, let it go. I mean, what can we let go?
And I second that. And I think, you know, I talked very briefly about that control piece. You know, we are in control, even though we feel out of control of a lot. We are in control of exactly how much media we watch, what shows we watch, and who we listen to, right? How often we want to have those conversations, even in our own homes. We are in control of how we show up to this meeting, right, to this webinar. what we choose to wear in the morning, how we reach out to people, you know, how we want to sort of navigate through this in a way that makes sense for us. And so there's a lot of control when you start looking at what we are in control of. There's really a lot that we are, and social media being one of them, that really it's okay to have that boundary if you've had too much, is to be honest about, I got it, it was just the headlines today, that's all I needed, I'm good. And to set that boundary for yourself, because it can be too much and people often struggle to set that boundary. But I think giving permission for them, but to when to switch off your stuff, right, when to close it down. And maybe if you've got children, every time you go back in that office, you've got to put quarter in the jar for them, you know, make it sort of a fun thing, make it about a whole family event, or make it sort of something fun, so that you really, and have an accountability buddy. It's another great thing, that you set up something at the end of a day that you need to go to. I did want to, Amanda, and I don't know if this is the right time, is to share what we have done as Invest EAP to support the community. Would this be a good time to jump in?
Absolutely.
Okay. So with Investing EAP, you know, we obviously serve municipalities in the state of Vermont, and we have set up not only peer groups with the police departments, not all of them, but a number of them, and we're growing. And that has been incredibly valuable. As we know, with fire, we're doing it with fire as well and rescue, that's a culture, you know, that's their own culture, and they often feel misunderstood, or they don't feel that they can really reach out because they're supposed to have it all, know it all. So for counseling, you know, they often struggle. They don't want to bring their issues home to their families, so they don't share with their families what's going on, but they can share it with their peer group. And so that has been so welcomed, and they have really embraced it. The other thing we've done is we've done a lot of town halls where we've really got the voice of the community. And initially we'd have sort of a lot of questions. People have a lot of questions. Initially we had a lot more irritation and anger at the system. It was going too slowly, or, you know, or I need my job, when are we going back? But as time's gone on, it's become a platform where people don't want to get off. It's really interesting because they're connecting and they're sharing. And so know that that's been fantastic. They have a voice, we've heard their voice, and we don't rush them through it. We allow people to stay on. You know, if we do it for an hour and a half, we always allow the 10, 15 minutes afterwards. There are always some people, stragglers, who just really want to, either they're introverted or they take longer to process, or they just want that connection. So it's been a wonderful platform. We also have been doing a series of webinars on how to navigate, this is for leaders, on how to navigate through challenging times, and really how do you support your staff if you're struggling yourself. So that's been successful. We've also acknowledged that we are not experts in racial equity and inclusion at all, but we have aligned ourselves and we have committed to partners who do have that expertise. So I encourage leaders and managers, if you don't have it, there are a lot of incredible resources, incredible skilled people out there, more than happy to partner with you. We've got incredible partners from all over the world, actually, who partner with us now. So we can understand it in a better way too, so we can be the best we can be. And then we've put together, I know that we have a resource page coming up, but we do have a COVID-19 resource page and one on racial or anti-racism, and with really incredible articles and books and movies to watch. So there's something for everybody in there. I encourage people to go on that, as I said, open to the public, and just go onto our website. And then I think the other thing, we've done a lot of proactive reaching out to people before they came to us. And there's something huge about that, about people, you reaching out to them. You know, we have a division in state government where a lot of the people that they serve, they've lost basically because they don't have phones and they probably do not have computers. And I was saying, do you have their addresses? And they said they do. And I said, wouldn't it be amazing to drop a handwritten note just saying, I'm thinking about you, you're not forgotten, for people who probably never get a handwritten note in their lives. It's just that little extra, so don't wait. You know, you can do those little things that make make a difference. We also have had, we've helped a lot of agencies come up with surveys for their staff. What do their staff want? Because if you think your staff want one thing and they want something separate, there's going to be a big old disconnect and more angry people. So we really want to make sure that their voice is heard, and that let's ask them what they're feeling, what they're needing, and ask for suggestions. They come up with great suggestions. It's a really good team effort. And then one of the things I was just showing as an example is about a week or two ago, I was speaking to principals from a number of the high schools, and originally they wanted us to touch every single from the principals to the superintendents, et cetera, and it was going to be a huge group and almost not doable in the scale of it. And when we sent the survey out to say what did they want, they didn't want that at all, actually, at all. And so we narrowed it down, and what we're doing now is the principals are going to be doing a book group of principals, and they're going to be picking books on racism and inclusivity and anti-racism, and how to speak to your staff in a way they can hear you, and what are the best ways to keep your leaders and your staff safe. And so they're going to be joining together, not only to read a book together, but to then open up conversations so they can become better leaders for their staff.
And I think that's an excellent point too, when we talk about, and we're rounding up our webinar for today, about how we can support our employees, one with COVID, but also continuing to give attention and time that definitely needs more about what are some of the issues with racism and how does that affect our employees and our communities, and what can we do about it. And we do have some resources and information that we will have, of course, included. Some of them we already highlighted briefly, but that will be included here for links, as well as for a handout that we'll have for additional reading and for additional resources for you as a city leader. So I just wanted to start to wrap up this. Thank you for additional resources for the EAP, Taryn, of what they can be able to think about and what are the benefits of that. We do have some resources here. Of course, the National League of Cities as well as APA have a plethora of resources on their web pages. So I want you to consider that and look at what are some specific resources and references that are appropriate to you for supporting your employees and different aspects of that. When we think of mental health and with self-care and with racism financially, all those different types of needs and support that your employees need, and specific resources and references that are relevant to you. So anything else, Dr. Blanton, Judy, Taryn, as we sum up? Otherwise, we do have our save the date of continuing with this topic for, again, the National League of Cities and APA, of how can we now look at taking care of our community and continuing to address collective trauma in times of crisis. So there's our save the date there for next webinar that is upcoming for this ongoing topic.
So I would have one thing. I've got to give a shout out for the APA website. Up at the top, they have a Corona-19. There are lots of resources, things on self-care and other things. Look at that. And I just like to close. There's you may have seen some people have translated in terms of the Chinese. It's not clear whether this is the accurate translation or not, but it's the symbol for danger and the ideogram for opportunity. Danger and opportunity. And when you put those two together, that is the Chinese symbol for crisis. So I think part of what we have to remember here is that we are having to deal both with the danger and the opportunities. And I think for all our leaders that are listening is to really pay attention to the both of those. And I've got faith, the bounded optimism that that they're going to be able to deal with those opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You couldn't have summed it up better, Judith.
All right, well, thank you again for attending our webinar, and thank you for our panelists for your expertise, and again, more information on the websites there.
Thank you, and bye everybody.
Bye-bye.